Namaskar, viewers and listeners of the Great Game Reloaded. I am Tilak Devasher. Bangladesh, a nation born out of a bloody liberation war, a country that once promised secularism, stability, and regional cooperation, now, once again, stands at a crossroad. What began as the killing of a student leader has spiraled into something far bigger, something far more dangerous. Cities are burning, media houses are under attack, minorities are being lynched, Indian diplomatic missions are being surrounded, and slogans are being raised that threaten not just Bangladesh's future, but South Asia's stability. This is not just about one man's death. This is about who controls the street, who controls the narrative, and whether Bangladesh can hold together as a functioning state. Let us begin with the spark. Sharif Osman Hadi, 32 years old, a student leader from the Inqilab Manch, a prominent face of the 2024 uprising that toppled Sheikh Hasina government. Shot in the head by masked assailants in Dhaka, airlifted to Singapore, declared dead after 6 days on life support. The interim government calls it an irreparable loss. Supporters call it martyrdom. The street calls for revenge. But here is the key detail, often missed in emotional coverage. Hadi was not just a student activist. He was a political actor preparing to contest the February elections, anti-Awami League and anti-India. Within hours of his death, the protests turned violent, not against unknown gunmen, but against symbols, newspapers, cultural institutions, political rivals, minorities, and India. The offices of Pratham Alu and the Daily Star, Bangladesh's largest newspapers, were vandalized and set on fire. Journalists were trapped inside smoke-filled buildings. They had to be rescued by security personnel. For the first time in decades, newspapers could not publish. Protesters did not stop at media houses. A Hindu man, Dipu was lynched by a mob over alleged blasphemy. His body was set on fire. The images shocked the region. This was not a protest. This was not spontaneous grief. This was targeted rage. This was an attempt to dominate. Bangladesh today is being ruled by an interim government led by Muhammad Yunus, an unelected administration tasked with holding elections, but more interested in retaining power, struggling to enforce order. This matters because when institutions weaken, the street fills the vacuum. And Bangladesh's street today is radicalized and increasingly intolerant. Now let us talk directly about India and a familiar pattern. Whenever Bangladesh faces internal turmoil, one slogan rises quickly: India is to blame. This is not accidental. Anti-India sentiment has become a political currency, a tool to unify angry crowds, a distraction from governance failures, a shortcut to legitimacy for radical actors, and to win votes in the forthcoming elections. After Hadi's death, mobs attacked Indian diplomatic missions, stone pelting outside the Assistant High Commission in Chattogram, sit-ins outside Indian facilities, calls to shut down Indian missions. An Indian fishing trawler rammed by a Bangladeshi patrol vessel near the international maritime border, and one fisherman was killed. Then there is Greater Bangladesh. The idea is not new. It has existed on the fringes for decades. An expansionist fantasy claiming parts of India's northeast, especially Assam, Tripura, and West Bengal's border districts. For years, it was dismissed as fringe rhetoric, but today it is being spoken openly by leaders emerging from street movements, amplified on social media, shared by mobs. This matters because ideas, when repeated enough, stop being fringe. And it is linked to India's Siliguri corridor, often called the chicken's neck. India's northeastern states, Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Nagaland, Tripura, are connected to mainland India by a corridor just 22 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Leaders linked to the National Citizen Party, like Asnat Abdullah, spoke openly about cutting off India's northeast, threatening India's seven sisters, even talking of war. The corridor is not just geography, it is logistics, supply chains, military mobility, civilian connectivity. Talk of isolating India's northeast, even rhetorically, tosses India's red line. And that is why India's response has been measured, not muted. India has issued advisories, closed visa centers, increased security, but avoided inflammatory statements. Restraint, not reaction. Because India does not want to be deliberately pulled into the narrative. So India is choosing diplomatic restraint, security preparedness, border vigilance, quiet signaling. But make no mistake, India's patience is strategic, not infinite. Threats to sovereignty are not debatable points. India will not ignore threats to its unity. The seven sisters are not negotiable. The chicken's neck is not rhetorical, and sovereignty is not a slogan. Notice the pattern. After Sharif Osman Hadi's death, protesters did not march only to police stations or courts. They marched to Indian diplomatic missions. They vandalized buildings allegedly close to India. They attacked newspapers accused of being pro-India. This is not organic outrage. This is directed anger. Anti-India slogans are being shouted openly. Indian flags are being trampled upon. Indian diplomats are being threatened. And it is being enabled by political silence at the top. The response of the US administration has been at best ambiguous, muted, distancing itself from the rhetoric but not crushing it. And in volatile environments, silence is interpreted as consent. Remember, Yunus himself has talked about the Seven Sisters in China a few months ago and handed out coffee table books that had the map of Greater Bangladesh on the cover. The tragedy of Bangladesh is that governance is not a seminar circuit, and moral capital that Muhammad Yunus claims does not substitute for political acumen or administrative ability. India is keeping a close watch on the developing situation in Bangladesh. Reports indicate that the army chiefs of the two countries have spoken directly to assess ground realities and prevent the crisis in Bangladesh from spilling over. Reports also suggest that the Bangladesh army chief has assured India that all Indian establishments and assets inside Bangladesh remain fully secure. Interestingly, he is also reported to have conveyed that despite the tense atmosphere, Bangladesh's security forces are committed to maintaining law and order. Now, let us address the question many are asking. Where is Pakistan in all this? Because whenever anti-India sentiment spikes sharply in South Asia, history tells us to look beyond the street and examine the shadows. For decades, Pakistan's strategic doctrine has been simple. Since it cannot defeat India directly, keep it internally unsettled, asymmetric disruption. Kashmir was one theatre, Punjab was another, the Northeast always an objective. And Bangladesh has featured in this thinking before. For Pakistan's military establishment, Bangladesh has always represented a loss never fully accepted, a grievance never fully resolved. A politically unstable Bangladesh today presents opportunity for Pakistan to use Bangladeshi territory, sentiment and chaos as leverage against India. Pakistan does not need to issue statements. It does not need to wave flags. Its methods are amplifying narratives through social media ecosystems, encouraging radical groups ideologically aligned with anti-India positions, reviving dormant networks along the eastern periphery, fueling street-level hostilities without overt fingerprints. This is not about creating unrest from scratch. It is about pouring fuel where sparks already exist. And Bangladesh right now has plenty of sparks. But anti-India unrest does not sustain itself on slogans alone. It needs organization, it needs cadres, and it needs ideological infrastructure. And this is where three names repeatedly surface: ISI, Jamaat-e-Islami, and its student wing, Chhatra Shibir. In 1971, Jamaat opposed Bangladesh's liberation. Its cadres collaborated with the Pakistani military. Its auxiliary forces, the Razakars and Al-Badr, were implicated in atrocities, especially against intellectuals and Hindus. After independence, Jamaat was politically weakened but never dismantled ideologically. Over the decades, it rebuilt quietly. The Chhatra Shibir is not just a student union. It is a cadre-based organization, highly disciplined, ideologically rigid, trained in mobilization, intimidation, and street control. For years, Bangladeshi security agencies and international observers have described Chhatra Shibir as one of the most organized Islamist student groups in South Asia. When protests turn violent with military-like coordination, when mobs know exactly which building to attack, when journalists, cultural centers and minorities are targeted simultaneously, you know it is the handiwork of the Chhatra Shibir. It is not random anger, it is structure. For Pakistan's intelligence establishment, Jamaat-aligned groups have always been useful. An unelected interim government, weak political parties, delayed elections, angry youth, a martyr narrative, and a convenient external enemy, India, makes for fertile ground. The ISI Jamaat Chhatra Shibir linkage is not a conspiracy theory. It is a historical pattern, not always visible, not always provable in headlines, but unmistakable in outcomes. Meanwhile, the United States and Canada have issued advisories asking their citizens in Bangladesh to exercise caution and restraint in their travel plans. In every Bangladeshi crisis, one institution looms in the background: the army. So far, it has stayed restrained, professional, in the shadows. But prolonged unrest creates pressure, domestic and international. When civilian authority weakens, expectations shift dangerously towards military intervention. That path has been walked before, and Bangladesh knows its cost. The challenge now is balance. Restore order without returning to authoritarianism. Hold elections without empowering mobs. Protect free speech without fear. So what happens next? Bangladesh today stands at a decisive moment and faces a choice. It can choose institutional recovery or slide into permanent agitation. It can reject emotive nationalism or weaponize it. It can hold credible elections or allow the street to decide the outcomes. The killing of Sharif Osman Adi was tragic, as was the lynching of Dipu Das. But the violence that followed the killing of Adi is a warning. Democracy cannot survive on rage alone. Nations cannot be built by burning institutions. And history does not forgive leaders who mistake chaos for revolution. Bangladesh's future will be decided not by the loudest slogans, but by the courage to choose stability over spectacle. The question is simple. Will Bangladesh step back from the edge, or will it keep walking until there is nowhere left to go? This movement will define Bangladesh's trajectory. It can reassert state authority, isolate extremist rhetoric, protect minorities, rebuild institutional trust, or it can allow street nationalism to hijack foreign policy. And history shows where that leads. Bangladesh's prosperity over the last decade came from pragmatism, not confrontation, from cooperation, not coercion, from stability, not spectacle. Undoing that will not hurt India, it will hurt Bangladesh. Bangladesh's leaders will have to decide quickly, will they govern the street or will the street govern them? I am Tilak Devasher. Thank you for watching. Do like, share and comment. Namaskar and Jai Hind.